Releasing, and if audio is started, let's see if it's started. Yes. All right, so we are approximately 10 minutes out. So if you're watching this after the fact, um, class will start in about 10 minutes. If you see a bunch of people roll in here, I might start talking a little bit early about stuff, but I'm gonna step out for a quick second. Go ahead. Coffee. I get some more.
Even though she tells me to.
Hi, Don.
Let's let everybody in and get rolling. Admit all. All right.
Did you have a nice weekend?
very busy, working on getting ready for Texas trip. Tomorrow we leave.
Yeah, you're leaving today or tomorrow?
Tomorrow.
So you're not gonna have class Wednesday?
Nope, no class Wednesday. And so I'll send out an announcement about that later.
Yeah,
Um,
I figured you're, because I remember he asked you about car, reserving a car for the second, third, and fifth or something.
oh yeah.
So I thought, what, that's that one of those days.
Yeah, that'd be Wednesday. So we've got Southwestern Association of Criminal Justice. Technically, I think I say educators at the end, but I like the fact that kind of part has dropped off a little bit because we want to incorporate more professional side. And
So what is that? Just a conference they have?
yeah, so basically what it is social conventions almost reminds me of Weekend at Bernie's. You ever see that film?
Yeah, but who's
Oh my
Bernie?
God. I don't know. We'll let you know next week. We'll see what happens by coming in here.
What was-
We do.
What was that, Dr. Fitzgerald?
See who comes in. Looks like it's Bernie's at 2. You know, those are really
He had kind of a rough semester last year, I think, last spring. He was,
Mhm.
I didn't know if he was gonna come back. He
Yeah.
was talking like he wanted to retire.
Oh yeah, he keeps doing that. It's like he turned out, yeah, well, I'm gonna cause trouble. No, I'm just kidding. No.
No, but I mean, I like him, but he's just, I don't know. Me and him just,
Yeah.
I don't know if we really clicked already. We're probably too much alike.
Yeah. But yeah, the SWACJ thing, what it is it's an organization. So we've got 2 national organizations for our field. One is the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences. The other one is the what is it? The American Criminology Society. I think I got those right. So one is ASC. That's the one that's kind of more that one is more research oriented.
Yeah.
And then the ACJS, that's the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences. That one's more practitioner oriented. I've gone to both. I tend to go more to ACJS than to ASC because I can't be a numbers nerd kind of thing. Given a choice, I won't go hanging out always with the numbers. It's like I want to be on people who've been up and doing the actual work. So that's the point of the SWACJ is they break it up into regions. So below the national, oh, sorry, back here. Below the national level, what they do is sections, regions of the United States. So we got a secondary level. And so that's what this one is. It covers 6 states in the Southwest. And so ideally what it does is it creates a place where you can start networking for the work, really, ideally is you got academics and practitioners and students who want to learn both in the same place. And so it should go off like a lightning rod. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
It just depends on who wants to do what kind of thing.
So how do you think your
Oh.
Thing went, certification thing? You think it went all right? No.
Well, so we've got some stuff going on with it related to my position as treasurer kind of thing. And I think all that stuff's gonna go off without a hitch because I document everything. And so it's one of those things that's as soon as they see it's pretty much undeniable. That's why I like things in print too.
You're pretty young still. You got probably quite a future ahead of you, I would imagine. So
Depending. Life is what it does.
it is what it is.
It is. Oh my goodness. You try to make the most. My goodness. That's why I like farmers. They're used to dealing with heaps of bullcrap.
And that's kind of hard. To do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's where I got my
And be
start.
nice about it. Be nice.
It's like it's all stinky. It's trouble. But all right. So last time we left off with rights of police officers. Oh, and like I said, I'll put out a notice for Wednesday here in a little bit. We left off with rights of police officers. So let's see, I'm trying to remember where we left off. Constitutional rights and civil rights is other stuff. Yes. They also have the State Law Enforcement Bill of Rights because they have that special duty, right? So we need to clarify what exactly that means in terms of rights, because in this field, we do things a little bit different. We focus on responsibilities and liabilities initially. That's what we kind of need to do, because if we focus on that part, the rights side of it comes out of it naturally. We don't have to try to debate whose rights come what, where, and that kind of thing. So it's really kind of an interesting thing that works properly. Let's see. So entitled Bill of Rights, police union contracts, First Amendment free speech.
Union contracts, yeah.
Mm-hmm. As private individuals, they have the right to support political parties. But again, if they're doing that not as private individuals, that's what runs into some issues. Okay. Officers of investigation for misconduct have due process for fair investigations and right to legal representation where it's investigated. Yes, so all those kinds of rights. Probably the biggest one there, I don't know if I want to get too much into it in this section because I want to get into it later, probably. It's the officer's investigation for misconduct. We'll have a section where it talks about misconduct, corruption, those types of things. And the reason why it is so hard to deal with is because
Has that changed lately? Because I've heard a lot of stuff on the news. It's more politics.
Mhm.
One person will say, well, police don't do anything because they don't want to get sued and because they don't protect them.
Yeah.
What, did they change something lately?
So
about
there's
that?
there's a lot of things that are going on. So in terms of like official protections and that kind of stuff, no. What's changed is society to some degree to what they justify as a rightful termination and
Yeah.
wrongful. And whenever it comes into like the social side is where things get so dangerous because that's where you can start getting some really interesting things where people are being held for stuff that they said in their own private. And so it gets really nasty. And that's the big thing that's changed. So we haven't quite figured out how to address that in the best way because you need to have, well, right here, the right to
First
speak.
Amendment,
Yes, you need to be able to speak. But at the same time, everyone's so worried about that social element and what you say and how it reflects on others. It's like that's one of those bigger problems in society. I mean, I just got out of crim law and we started dealing with life and death. And so it's like, okay, the first thing we need to talk about is time, which means so we'll have to talk about like the abortion issue a little bit because that's the start. That's the time ordering. That's a hot topic issue. People did not feel the ability to speak freely. I kept pointing that out to them. It's like you should, okay, here's what's going on. I can talk about it freely, but
Well.
you should. And that's one of those things. It's you run into that same thing over here, and you're running into it across all dimensions because social media is what it is. So it's one of those things that society is going to change massively over the next couple of decades. And where this one goes, that one's kind of dangerous because you have everything related to the process itself. It needs to be fair. It also needs to be private to some degree to keep it fair. And so how do you do that? How do you manage that when you have something that's visible? How do you do that whenever you also have the people's response to it? They want to see a response and they want to see it pretty fast with something egregious. But these processes are made to be slow because we don't want people to move basically on emotion because if they do, we'll do the wrong thing. That is an inevitability. And there's always that pressure to move faster.
Isn't that all? It's all civil service jobs, though.
Mhm.
It's like it's a first because you got to be very careful. You might offend somebody by talking publicly if
Oh, yeah.
about politics or whatever.
Oh yeah. Well, I think that's the.
I could see where you you could get yourself in trouble.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And I mean, it's such an issue. And actually, you just made a connection. I hadn't really thought about it. I would want to like really think about it a little bit more. But like from like a philosophical sense, I think that's kind of the idea behind the pronouns thing. I never understood the pronouns thing. Because it's for me, anytime I look at that, what I see is why is it I'm concerned with how other people are talking about me in my absence, or if I'm not involved in the conversation. I don't care what people talk about. It's like I just want people to talk and to think.
So what do you mean by pronouns? You talk about like what you go by?
No, like the language thing. You refer to me as this, you'll use mine and this.
Right.
And so it's like you're trying to control other people's speech when you're not around.
Yeah, but if you're an officer and you just meet somebody else, you don't know what they go by. You don't.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, what do you do? Ask them first thing. What's your pronoun?
That might be something they look to do in terms of
You
procedures.
think they're going to do that?
Yeah, they might actually have to do something like that.
Wow.
Work it into the language if it continues to be more sensitive.
That's getting really in the weeds.
Yeah, and that's what it's like, that social thing. It's like in the next few years, we're gonna have to figure that one out because if we don't, it will only get worse. And so that's one of those things that's really interesting to see because what it is, it's a good problem to have. It's just how we're handling it is not good. Is really what it is. It's just people can't see that because they see how we're handling it. And it's like
That bottom one,
right to
legal representation. Now, are they? I don't know. It probably depends on the department that they work for, but they have either the union or the department represents them.
So they do it a couple different ways. So most what they do is insurances is what they'll do. Then whether it be through the union or through the department itself. And so depending on the form of the lawsuit that comes, because there's liabilities involved. Basically what they'll look at is anyone who's trying to, if you're going to get a lawsuit or an investigation or a complaint or anything like that, their goal is to find the biggest pot to dip into kind of thing for cash, because if you've had some harm, you want to maximize your compensation for harms,
It's
right?
like a deep pocket.
Exactly. So the best way you do that is by selecting the right targets. And for this thing, it's the municipalities, that kind of a thing. And so whenever you get a lawsuit, what they want to do is they want to go after the department itself or maybe the city itself. City's even better, more money, right? And so there's a whole bunch of liability. I don't want to say networks or schemes or something like this. It's kind of like that, just structure. And so in any type of a complaint or issue, depending on what it does specifically, if it attaches to like certain things like the use of force is a common one because that's something they have to train on. And so if there's a violation there and they can see that that officer's individual violation is representative of some flaw in training, boom, you got the department, maybe the municipality just right off the bat. And so the amount of money you can go for changes a lot because of insurance. So the department itself will carry insurance for litigation and the individual officer will carry insurance for this type of stuff for counsel. And so depending on who's sued determines whose lawyer gets tapped kind of thing, whose insurance gets tapped for the most part. And that's largely how that works. Most often, because I'll talk about this a little bit more. Well, if they have a liabilities thing, I'll talk about it even more. Most of them, what you have to realize is huge number of complaints. Huge number of complaints. Most complaints come in because of how something is done, not what exactly is done, because what's done, usually there's authority to do it. It's how it was done. And so in that aspect of it, you have a large number of complaints, and then you have to go through and verify which ones are real and which ones aren't. And the average population, they don't deal with the criminally inclined as much as, I guess, the police do. So they don't realize how many of those are going to be false complaints and how many of those are going to be real, or how to tell the difference.
So who's it up to judge that? It's not a court, is it? Is it?
It depends. It depends. So it's like you have your internal complaint. It's like anywhere. It's like the same thing here.
Yeah.
You have your internal complaint processes. You have your official complaint processes, and then you have the outside processes that involve this thing, right? And so, what was I going? Okay, so the number of complaints high. The number of lawsuits is actually really high. The number of lawsuits that make it anywhere is extremely low. The number of lawsuits that have big tickets that you see in the news, you start getting close to like single digits. If you're on YouTube, you do those types of things. What you'll see there's a lot of YouTube channels that do like the police audits kind of thing. Some of them are really like, I want to dig into who's actually running because they might be a legitimate person. Like I know some of them are lawyers and they're doing it, and it would actually, it's the correct breakdown of stuff. Some of them are less so. The ones that are less so, what they tend to do is they'll go and try to involve themselves in police incidences or cause a situation where their rights get reduced for whatever it is that they're doing because of what's happening, and it's wrongful in nature because you're supposed to be free. Usually what ends up happening with those is a lawsuit that can be sustained in their favor, can be won in their favor. But usually they're talking like tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, and certainly not millions. And if you look at the big ones, everyone thinks about multi-million-dollar ones. Those are big tickets.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's one of those things. It's like money is a very dangerous thing.
But you think sometimes, this is getting in the weeds, but
Mhm.
politics plays into that? Because a lot of times I think they settle the case because it looks bad,
That's again exactly.
you know?
Mhm. Depending on what's done and how bad it is, or what the social outcry will be.
Yeah, even if you're not wrong,
Mhm.
but it looks bad,
Mhm.
then they settle it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so you have to figure in the cost for the litigation, that kind of stuff, the time involved, the how much your power is going to be down because people are going to be tied up in other things, and so they do all that math. Those kinds of conclusions. But it's one of those interesting things that yeah, politics will play a part of it because it always does. It'd be like talking about what is it? This would be 2020 St. Louis. The lawyers outside their gated community or inside their gated community,
Oh,
outside
yeah.
their home,
Yeah.
right? One's got an AR, the other one's got a mock pistol. It
Mhm.
was and so they're in their yard, and dude with the rifle, I didn't see him point at anybody, but I don't remember. It's been 2 years. The lady, she was pointing that pistol everywhere.
Mhm.
Wasn't a functional firearm, right? They're well within their rights to do what they were doing because you have a large group of people that forced their way into a gated community and are threatening them quite literally What happens there is they're the ones who are tagged with the crime. Because if they've done it the other way, they're gonna be dealing with, well, that litigation issue in numbers.
That's a political thing too, because those people.
Politics are always numbers.
Well, it's almost you choose who you want to
Mhm.
persecute
Oh, yeah.
or prosecute.
Oh,
It's
they do.
like the people that were on trespassing, well, they could have prosecuted, but they didn't. It's all, it's a lot, you're right, a lot of it's political.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of taking the politics things that we do in terms of voting and turning it into a physical, there's a person in front of my house kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so, if I remember the movie, I'll quote it. There's a really good movie, but I've got a quote about voting. It's like, voting politics is always a show of force. That's why they count the numbers. It's always a show of force.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the thing that changes because there's so many people in that one area. What's the easiest thing for the officer to do? And then what's going to get you the social outcry, right? And they've got to be responsive to both.
Yeah.
What's right in the situation, the social outcry, and everything else, and getting it done. And so it becomes it's messy. It can be very messy.
I think that's a good reason why you need to have a police force that mirrors the community that they're serving.
Exactly.
Because if they do, they can identify with them more about those kind of issues.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, they'll know more about it. They'll be able to communicate more effectively.
exactly.
The most interesting thing is they'll think like people in the area. It's like, if you were trying to, there's like problem oriented policing, trying to figure out what's going on with this, maybe it's a drug situation. If you start really thinking about it, it's like, okay, well, if I know the people in the area, I know where they're hanging out, I know where to hit them, I know where to find, and so you just break it out from there.
I was gonna say that that's actually true because
Yeah.
the last few times I've been filling out forms or something like that, they actually have a section on there for like job stuff or anything pretty much doctor stuff. They actually have a section including transgender people now and whether they're preferred pronouns. So
Yeah.
that is something
Yeah.
that probably down the line the police force would have to at least notate in their systems.
Yeah, and that's something that's changing massively in our society within this last generation. If you look at those numbers, that's a population thing. Where if you look at it, it was what was it? 20 years ago, it was like 1% of the population, and now it's I want to say it's still in the single digits, but it might not be. I can't remember. But what you're talking about there is at some point when they start talking about the population stuff, remind me, and we'll talk about that subject a little bit more because the way that they present the population stuff, you start applying it the same kind of way there, you'll see what kind of what's going on there. It's like probably the closest analogy would be Asian population here in this country. Really small number, but they're experiencing massive growth. It's just most people don't appreciate it because the size of the population itself is still, of course it's like Caucasian, black, white, black, African American. I like black better because it catches more of them. And then you got Hispanic, and then try to remember what level they're at because they're like a few more ranks down in that, and that's a really small group by the time you get over to them. Small change, but it's actually really, really big change in what will happen is in another generation it maintains. Country's different again, right? And so change is a big part of it. Addressing that change in the best ways. It's like, that's they try to put it in the structure, so it probably would be something like that. Is in the initial encounters, what they'll do is they'll change like the standard ways that you approach things. It's like, if you have a traffic stop, you walk up, the whole approach the vehicle, you're watching for dangers, and now the special language you have to use will have another line you have to add into it. Not a huge thing, but it is one more thing. Here's what moves into patrol. And so from an organizational perspective, I think I mentioned it's like this is where the bulk of everyone is. If you look at organizations overall, people take up like 80% of your resources just right off the bat. That's just key. When you look at policing, almost, I can't remember the percentage, but the vast majority is in patrol because that's where the job is. You're gonna be out on the streets. Next to the backbone of policing, it's because anytime you think of the police, that's what you think of. It's like you think of a person who's out on the street or a person who's in a uniform, and that's going to be your patrol officer for the most part. Let's see, majority of officers assigned to patrol, marked patrol car uniform visible. There you go. They're talking about visibility there. The reason why they talk about visibility there is because you have the ways that people think about policing, and you have what they've seen, their personal experiences, and that visibility thing's a pretty big effect. Has a pretty big effect when it comes to things like legitimacy, authority, that kind of thing. So if you're doing the job and people can see you're doing the job, hey, I'm more likely to I may be more likely to listen to what you have to say. That kind of thing, because I know that you're actually doing the job. It says patrol officers are gatekeepers for the entire criminal justice system. Yes. It also mentions about police officers at the individual level. This is what they start because they want you to understand what this is like. When you get into the gatekeepers for the entire criminal justice system, it's like that's the real big thing. These are your first line of contact with the government, governmental agents, and citizenry. Not only is it the first level, first contact, it is probably the most, well, it should be the most sensitive because these people are innocent. Always. Even if you catch them doing something, like, you're still innocent. And so that's the big piece of this thing is you're opening up the entire criminal justice system. This is that point where it's person to person, I guess, the actual rubber meeting the road is what it is. That's also why they talk about cultural assimilation, agents of cultural assimilation, all that kind of stuff, because they're the ones who make the choices to enforce what and bring you into that system right there.
I kind of think that we've gotten away from personalized relationships with police officers.
Yeah.
So I think that's where you get into like all the mistrust, and if you don't have a relationship
Mhm.
with the police in your area and you don't,
Yeah.
it causes friction, I think. I mean, if you don't trust them, you don't respect them.
Well,
But if you knew them, you might respect them and you might trust them.
exactly. It makes conversation easier.
Right.
And that's the thing that people kind of don't. Like, being a police officer, you get it pretty quick,
Yeah.
right? But it's like that ability to converse with people is like one of the best ways, most effective aspects of policing. If you can talk with someone, you can. Oh my goodness! And what's happened in society with that one is really kind of interesting. I don't know exactly what it is, but what it seems to me is something like rather than dealing with people individually, the first thing you need to recognize is that I'm a group member. That's like, I don't understand how that flipped in society is, because you need to recognize what groups I belong to see me. It's like, just see me as I am. Why do you even know what groups I belong to? Why does that matter? I don't understand. But that's me. Functions of patrol. Okay, here it mentions deterrence, it mentions safety, and it mentions service. All right. So we kind of talked about that first element. What do you want to say? Deterrence.
Well, the first thing that popped into my head was that Kansas City study,
Yes.
and that deter crime. Well, they said that it doesn't deter crime.
Yeah. And so the research on that stuff is mixed. It always is. And basically, anytime we get in research, is mixed findings are actually really good, because that means that there's something contradictory there that we haven't figured out. With that one, it has to do with the thresholds there. If we're running really well as a society, it doesn't do a damn thing for insurance. However, if you look at what's happened in the last few years, I've not seen anybody do this yet, but I imagine it'll come out probably within the next 5 years. Look at the places where people in those positions of authority, like your prosecutors and stuff. I mentioned, that was a different class I was talking about that. Prosecutors, they make those decisions for what gets, well, actually charged. How many places have you had prosecutors publicly state there's an entire class of crime we are not going to punish? What do you think that does for this right here? And what do you think has happened in those areas? They have done exactly that. It's like, that's what you need to do is for deterrence, you need to look at it at the inverse. You need to flip it completely upside down, because normal society doesn't need to be deterred because we're functional. That's the thing that people don't get there. Public safety, I like to talk about a little bit, because when you get into, I just check to make sure we still have time for that thing go off. Safety is an interesting concept. I like to think of it as like something theoretical, because it doesn't exist. It's a feeling, but actual safety doesn't exist. And to give you an idea, it's like it's probabilities. If you start looking at crime itself, crime doesn't exist if you look at numbers. That's a methods thing. If you look at all places across all time, crime is such a small thing that it's that technically, if you do the probabilities, it's zero. Zero is your best guess.
But if you look at public safety,
Mhm.
okay, there's the reality of it, and there's the on
danger.
paper of it.
Yes, there's the feeling of danger.
The government may say, okay, well, crime is down. Yeah, but we didn't put it in the big cities and we didn't do all this stuff. We
Mhm.
just put crime is down. Well, they're thinking it is down, but it's not.
No,
in reality, if you're on the street, it's not down.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
up.
Oh, yeah.
But they just don't record.
Yeah, they play with the numbers. So.
They're playing
Oh, yeah.
numbers games, and it's
Oh, yeah.
all. It gets back to that politics thing.
Oh, yeah.
all
Oh, yeah.
political.
Oh, yeah. It's one of those things that's really funny if you get into the numbers thing. What I like to ask is if you've ever had any experiences with a department that has a gang unit, ask the gang unit how much of a gang problem they have. All of you going to tell you the same thing. It's a huge problem.
Mhm.
You're like, is it really though? Is it just a bunch of kids or is it really? A
That's
gang?
true. That's the same thing I recently learned. Basically, the media created the term black on black crime. There's no real threat of black on black crime. Like it was more of a
Yeah.
campaign thing, more of a,
Yeah.
a thing to kind of put fear. But actually, the reason there's no such thing as black on black crime is because the the black on black crime is literally just crime of proximity. They're
Yeah.
just if another black person robs somebody down the street that happens to be black, that's literally probably their neighbor. They probably know them.
Mhm.
They probably so like, is there a
Oh,
real threat of black on black crime taking over the city because 3 square miles of a 400 thousand person
mhm.
city is being, people are just basically committing crimes against each other. It's just a figment of the imagination.
Yep, yep. Yeah, when you get into the crime stuff, almost all of it's within race. And that's what's so funny. If you look at and you hit it on the spatial side, just spot on. I did this with Little Rock a couple years back. I guess it's almost been 10 years ago now. I took a few years of their data and all of their police incidences, I put it was like a 1.5 mile circle around the university I worked at. And so that's literally not even 3 miles. Maybe it was I can't remember if it was the radius was 1.5 miles or the whole diameter was. So it's a really small circle. I mean, you're talking less than 3 miles, definitely. Had over 80, maybe 90% of all crime in the entire city. That's a city for like 300,000 people.
Well, but it's based on a lot of it
Mhm.
is
All of those things come together, whether it's the population elements, the danger elements, the function elements, all of those things come
I
together.
hate to say it's low income areas. It's
Oh, it
people that
is.
don't have money is
Mhm.
where the crime and it's because that's well, that's how they think they need to make their money. You know what I'm saying? Because they can't make it any
The
other way.
population.
And I can kind of understand why they're trying to do all
Mhm.
those studies and stuff about how to alleviate those problems. Because if you take that problem away, you might take a lot of the crime away. You know,
Yeah, yeah. Well, what's really interesting is
just get way off on something else.
yeah, well, it's if you're trying to make changes to those types of things like the actual neighborhoods. Probably the best book I ever read was I think it was from the 70s. It could have been from the 60s though. It was on the Vice Lords of Chicago.
Mhm.
Can't remember the author's name. I want to say his first name is David, but I have to look it up. Basically, what it was is he was a researcher, went into the area, and he started documenting everything. And whenever he saw what was going on, he started trying to make some changes in the area. The biggest one was going after federal funding to reinforce the economy for inner city Chicago. And in the course of a couple of years, they transformed the entire area. Grant funding ran out, and they didn't want to renew it because it's politics. Boom, goes right back to the way it was. Right,
Yeah.
and so there's you got some stuff there.
I think it's more should be on the local level instead
Mhm.
of federal. I mean,
Yeah.
I hate to say it because they're the people that see the problems. You know, you
Mhm.
don't see it when you're in your ivory tower. You know,
That's it exactly.
it's the people that are on the ground. They need to do something about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. And then when we're talking about public safety, I wanted to talk about there is safety thing. That's something all officers are charged with when we get into the safety thing. It's like realize that is just a feeling that there's always that risk of danger. How much that danger is, people often underestimate. That's when we get the use of force stuff. Usually the best thing I like to ask there is, the threshold for killing someone. How easy is it to kill someone? It's extremely easy. It happens accidentally all the time, right? That's the kind of thing that people need to realize is that safety isn't really a thing. It's just, it's more theoretical if you really think about it. When you start dealing with public safety, actually, I'll go into it a little bit right now because that's on my mind. The thing that you need to be aware of there, it would be Balistreri versus Pacifica Police Department. That's going to be a case from the 1980s.
I remember that one.
Yep. It gives you the 4 situations in which safety is actually something the government is required to provide for you, right? That's what's so dangerous about this thing, because if you start looking at what safety is not what you think it is.
You know.
Yes, the first thing that they'll list there in terms of whether or not they really have to give you safety is whether they have told you specifically that they will protect. It's like that order of protection doesn't do it, right? If they have to say it to you specifically, or they have to cause the danger themselves, and if they're not the ones doing it, they're not the ones responsible for it. And probably the biggest one there is when you're automatically guaranteed that they'll take care of your safety when you're in chains. Because then you're in their custody, you're in their care. That's what that means. So be careful with that safety thing. It can be good, but realize that the walls in the prison are tall, just like the walls anywhere else. Are you trying to keep people in or keep people out?
Do you still have that as an assignment in procedures?
Which one?
That case you just talked about? Because we did it in that class.
Probably that would be procedure.
That was very interesting because
Mhm.
it was basically a domestic violence thing.
Yeah.
And her husband.
And they condoned it. If you look at it.
Yeah.
It's like, what'd you do to deserve it? It's like, oh.
Yeah. It was terrible.
Yeah.
The
The
thing
80s
is,
is
and you look at that, but and then they sued the guy, and they
Mhm.
never really. I don't even think they ever really won that
No,
case.
they didn't.
She never won. Didn't get anything. And her husband was harassing the
Oh yeah.
crud
Oh yeah.
out of her.
The domestic stuff's one of those things where you can see huge shifts in. I think we might have talked about it a little bit in here. If I did, it would have been the Violence Against Women's Act.
Mhm.
That one's in '94, and that's what I want to show people in terms of like cultural changes. If you look at that, after that act, we start getting more towards we have the common conception of what domestics are and how to approach them. You go back and look at the '80s stuff; it's a nightmare because you'll see stuff like that. What'd you do to deserve it? What'd you do to start it? That kind of thing. Or my worst one was a case where it was a lady divorced. I think I can't remember if she's divorced or not, but separating. Husband or ex-husband did not have custody of kids. Husband goes and takes kids from school. She notifies the police. Police do nothing. She gets a call from the husband, finds out where they're at. Oh, they're out at the circus or something like that. Not circus, but something like that. Fair came to town or something. I'll have them home at 8. 8 o'clock comes and rolls around. They're not home. She calls the police. He's still not bringing them home. Okay, well, he said he'd bring them home. Just wait. 10 o'clock rolls around. Midnight rolls around. 1 o'clock rolls around. 3 o'clock rolls around. The next morning rolls around. He rolls up into the police station with their dead bodies in the back of his vehicle. Like, yeah, all the kids are dead. If I remember correctly, I think he went off and did enough stuff that he got shot right there, kind of thing. It's like, yeah. And if they had stepped up at any point in time in the half day that occurred beforehand, those lives would be alive. Right? Like somebody's responsible for that.
Have they changed those laws a lot on public safety? Because it's like it used to be. Like that case, I think that was an older in the '80s or something, and now they usually arrest somebody, don't they?
Yeah, usually what their practice now is what they'll do is
So public safety is kind of changing in that area.
yeah, usually what they'll do is they'll remove one person from there. If they need to take someone to jail, they will, but they'll try to force a separation like that to get the specific scenario to cool down kind of thing. If they arrest someone, odds are it's going to be the male just because of the size differential there and the aggression. But that's one of those things that society goes back and forth on that. It's interesting because if you compare the 1980s to today, sometimes you'll see that same behavior crop up in the other direction. Where it's, what did you do to deserve this? I didn't deserve to have my iCloud out.
Yeah,
It's like that kind of a thing.
Is it stereotypical too? And I hate to say this, but there are men that are abused by their wives.
Oh, yeah.
Believe me,
Oh yeah.
it's happened to me, but I mean, most people laugh at that. You know, if your wife
Oh,
gets
marriage.
you or something, yeah, or goes out and slits your tire or something, you deserved it somehow, you know.
Like, yeah, well,
That's them saying, why did you do that to make her mad? You know?
yeah, exactly. It's like, okay, there's a
So it's kind
story.
of stereotypical.
Yeah, yeah, because it's one of those things that it's there will be a story,
Yeah.
right? Because it didn't just start with this. There
Mhm.
will be a story.
Yep.
And what's going on here, right? Because it's gonna be something like that. The making officers available for service. That's got to do with if you're out on patrol, your response times are, in theory, can be reduced depending on where you're at. You can get mobilized a lot faster. You're already in areas that stuff pops up. That's one that can be a little bit more difficult depending on what you're doing because you have to stop and think about it a little bit. If we really want to talk about that, what I'd say is think about a call for something about, like, let's say guns present. You got X number of officers on patrol across the city. If it's a violent thing, how many officers do they need to have at the scene before they actually go and respond because of the dangers introduced to them individually, right? So they've got to coordinate and get there and time it just right, that kind of thing. That's not as easy as what you think. Let's see, here we go. Moving into factors affecting patrol circuits. The number of officers is going to be the biggest one. That's that manpower. That's just what that is. The number of people, the number of, just the amount of stuff you get done.
Yeah, there was something on the test about that authorized force.
Mhm. Yeah,
Because we've already had to take the test by now, so.
yeah. I probably need to go in there and grade some essays.
Yeah,
I'm
that would be-
way behind on
That would be nice.
Yeah, yeah. Give me actually with this trip, I'll actually have more time to get that kind of stuff caught up because
Yeah,
I'll
you've
have
been
nights.
busy with that.
Well, I've been
That
busy with that
conference.
stuff, but then my nights usually run. She's a night owl, so she's usually up anywhere from like till 2 to 4 in the morning. Yeah, so I went to bed at like 5 almost, been up at 3.
Mhm.
Yeah, or up 3 hours later.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Get your hands full.
it's good though. All right, so it talks about number, percentage, and distribution. So what they're talking about there is how many officers you have in total, what percentage of the officers you have are actually at patrol. And then when we start talking about distribution, realize you're talking about time and locations. That's going to be a particular thing. So if you start looking at the inverse, what that actually means is that, well, if you think about it in terms of like, how would I want to say, almost like a security type of perspective. If you flip it and look like you're trying to secure a location, realize that the difficulty it is to protect something versus attack is at least 3 to 1, right? Because if you have to, like if you're going to, let's say if you're dealing with the city kind of thing or a location, let's say, make a security location like a building, right? The number of people you have by the times of day is usually they split your shifts across 3, right? So 3 8-hour shifts or 2 12s with 1 overlap, right? And so what ends up happening there is, so at any one point in time they have to deal with something, the actual ability they have to provide any service is already cut down to 33% just because of time, right? Just because you have it split across 3 shifts or 4 shifts, right? And now you got how many areas do you have to cover and how are we going to split those up? So your actual coverage is a whole lot lower than what people think it is. It's like on a given day, at the lowest point in time for a city with a couple 100,000 people, how many officers might they actually have on patrol? You might be in the single digits, right? And that's for how many people? And if anything actually breaks loose, what happens? Insufficient, right?
Well, a lot of that depends on how many officers you have on duty. And like now,
Mhm.
manpower is being stretched so bad that
Oh yeah,
they're working overtime and, you know, they're getting pretty tired, I bet.
oh yeah.
Because people don't want to be police officers anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
to be honest with you, I can't blame them.
Yeah, well, if you get into the cultural stuff, it's like, you're taking in all the risk, all the criticism.
Yeah.
And now it's at scale rather than just being you in your area. Now it's the entire world. And so it's like, ooh, yeah, there's gonna be some pause there.
So is that how they like, I don't know if you remember, know much about
Yeah.
New York City, but when, way back in the nineties or 2000, didn't they use some sort of a didn't they do like studies about different sides of how to keep crime lower by, by that, by assigning the right number of people and all that kind of stuff?
I would have to go back and look, because depending on what area you're tapping into. From the department side, usually that's gonna have to do with how they do their analyses and determine
Yeah.
this kind of stuff. So it's
That'd be
gonna feed into that
That'd be a
process.
great job to have, I think.
Yeah.
Figured out that, would the methods have anything to do with that? What?
Basically, there's a few different ways that they do that. One of them is the comparative way where they look at sister cities kind of thing.
Yeah,
And they try to find an area that's relatively similar to them in terms of environment and population, that kind of a thing. And so then they look and they try to mirror that to some degree. The other thing they do is they look at changes over time. It seems like we're seeing spikes in this. Do we need to justify new positions? There's another way that they do it too. I want to say that one's based on, is that function? And that's within the organizations themselves. On the research side, we do all kinds of different things. And that's where things get, I'd have to dig in to see a little bit more about that one, because it's something they do. They go all over the place. Yeah. Because you can start getting into the stuff that deals with deterrence theory, you deal with stuff that deals with action control, you deal with stuff that has to do with organization stuff. And each of those will deal with those kinds of topics in different ways. Okay. Yeah.
This is a crazy question, but don't get me started.
No, it's good. I like it.
Talk about automobiles. The automobile changed policing so much.
Yes, it did.
I wonder how it would be today if there wasn't cars. Like if this city, would there be cops walking beats everywhere around this city?
Yeah, it'd probably be
So
like,
would the
like that.
relationships be better?
You'd be more social. Everything would be a lot closer.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and that's the big thing that's changed in society in the last, well, since the Industrial Revolution, really. If you really want to get into it.
So technology always isn't a good thing.
No, it allows us to do some stuff, but it always has significant drawbacks. It's one of those things that's like, that's one of those laws in life that people kind of don't really appreciate it as much as we think. My favorite one actually is a biological one. If you look at what is it? The phrase is ontogeny, recapitulates phylogeny. Funny phrase. Basically, what it is embryonic development. You can actually overlap all species to the point at which they differentiate, which is really cool. But if you look at upon birth, how quick is it for a horse to start walking? Right? Yeah. You're talking a couple minutes, right? A dog, it's a few weeks, right? A person, right?
A year.
Yeah, the difference, that time frame, the level of care you have to give for animals kind of thing. As you start feeding intelligence, there's a lot more support that goes into that. And so that's the same kind of thing going on here with this is that the cost of moving in such a good direction is going to balance out in different areas. You just have to balance it. And that's the hard thing. When they start doing that, that's one of the things they look at, police population ratio. And then, police with high population ratio don't have lower rates. That's sort of like the relationship between police officers in crime and the law in crime. You know, it's there is no direct relationship other than the fact that we increase the number of officers if we have particular problems, or if we're having particular problems, we might increase the number of statutes we can use to punish people. That does not help any of those problems necessarily. It can address it to some degree because that deterrent side of it, but it's not the same thing as going in and actually changing things, right?
You don't think police, see, because some areas you get into, you don't need police. I mean, you get
Oh,
into the
yeah.
middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
But some areas you need them more. I mean, it's like, is there any kind of ratio about how that is as far as, you should have, like more police in certain areas?
There's no set
It
ratio.
should be,
No.
it should be like 0 to
Mhm.
100,000 in some areas, and it ought to be 1,000 to 10,000 in other areas.
I've not seen any specific numbers that were given. I mean, that's something we could look and do an analysis and kind of say what it
Yeah.
is. What was I thinking? Typically what they do for that is going through numbers. I'm trying to remember the process there.
'Cause it's gotta be different for urban and for
Yeah,
country or rural, I guess.
it is. So how they do that, it's gonna typically what they'll do, depending on how much knowledge they have, how they run data and that kind of stuff, they'll go at it a different way, but they kind of do the same kind of thing. Where you look at you start moving into some of that crime analysis. So you'll break it down on weekly, hourly, gosh, say daily, hourly, and then across locations. You can take your old police incident data and start mapping those things out to see where calls of what type are coming in at what kind of numbers. And they use that to kind of determine where they're going to allocate.
And a lot of it depends on time of day,
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Saturdays,
Oh,
Friday
yeah.
night,
And so they do the math. I
weather's
mean,
good, weather's bad, there's a
Mhm.
lot of stuff, yeah.
yeah, that's a whole range of, that's technically a crime analysis. Most large, departments will have crime analysis units, maybe at least a crime analysis person. Because what that is, it's an overall guide when you don't have any specific directions, because they can start pulling that stuff out. Let's see, we talked about that relationship with high crime rates. Yeah, so if you look at the number of police officers, if it's really, really high, that can be really good or really bad. And it's just like laws, you got a whole lot of them, it's like, yeah, not necessarily a cure, that means that there's a problem there, that's what it indicates. Okay, distribution, areas with more times and more crime or assign more officers. I mentioned per capita approach, where you just number of people working in the area. Minimum manning levels are predetermined, so that they just use history there. Police departments are just getting started. Budget's the other one. How much money do you have? Workload. As we start dealing with the services, distribution of police officers and services. Right. And so those are all different ways that they can be done. Usually they'll be based off of some balance of these approach if they're doing it right. Right. Most often what they'll do is they'll this one and then this one, right? Predetermined and then what's authorized. If there's some particular problem, maybe they're looking at workload or revising based on capita. This areas and times with more crime, that's more of a micro level one. Right? Once you have the people in there, once you have everything set, here's how we're going to actually assign them.
That would be hard to do
Oh, it is.
as far as figuring, because you gotta put the pieces of the puzzle together. Let's say you don't have enough people. Well, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, you have to
I mean,
redistribute your services, you have
guy
to
off the
revise
desk.
departments, you have to,
Yeah,
yeah. And so it's one of those things, it's a difficult task because you're
Yeah.
literally balancing all these areas. And so you'll have budget numbers, you'll have previous numbers, you'll have the numbers related to crimes, you'll have the numbers related to services, and you have to balance all those. All right, organization, assignment. Okay, so here's where they start talking about hot spotting. So this kind of thing, crime analysis, what that leads to is hotspots. That's gonna kick up in like 1989 when they first started doing it. Hot spotting. Basically, what they do is they look at crime incidences and how they take place, where they take place over time. Right? Some areas have a lot more crime than others. That's actually that number is like 55. And what is it? It's 80 to 20. Okay, so this is the law of crime concentration in theory. 5% of locations cause 50% of crime, hold 50% of crimes. 20% of locations hold 80% of crimes. So that's a spike that looks like this. It's a mode of productivity, right? The fewer number of locations have a whole lot more. What's funny is this is actually, some books will mention this. This is economics. The Pareto principle. 80-20. That's for any mode of productivity, 80% of your goods are going to be produced by 20% of people. It's also Price's law. It's the number of people in an organization. Half of that work is done by the square root of that number. Crime is a little bit different because of what you're looking at here is 50% should be at 10%. Right? Because if it's 100%, square root of that's 10. So this one's actually more concentrated. So there's some extra concentration there that we can start to pull out and Maybe create some new laws for it. Let's see. Strict seniority. Some get new assignments on a regular interval. Some rotate, depending different time frames. Areas received a report number. Yeah, that's just basically giving you the definition of hotspot. Doesn't give any more than that. That's kind of surprising to me. It's one of those things that as you start intersecting this, realize that you can separate this on different crime types, different time frames, and then you can start seeing how stable those things are. But with that, we are officially out of time. So we'll pick up with types of patrol next week. So remember, no class on Wednesday. You all have a great week. And if you need anything, let me know. I'll be getting grades out over this week. And I'll probably post out a whole bunch more stuff. Because if I'm out and traveling, I'll have nights open a little bit. I can get all the rest of this class opened up for the rest of the semester. So I would just get it squared away. With that, if y'all have any questions, anything, let me know. And I will see you on Monday, 1 week from today. Have a good one. Bye. All righty.